It is my pleasure to introduce George this way, that an exemplary public servant for as long as I've known him, which is a very long time, a truly outstanding person who now as county executive is facing a whole host of new challenges, and he's gotten off, I think, and this is not because he's standing here, is within striking distance, but who I think is really making positive moves to at least re-examine decisions that were made, look at things fresh, also embarking on new initiatives. And this is what somebody coming into office, this is what they do. So I have my colleague, if I may point him out, Richard Hyman, who I've also known a long time, and who is a consultant, has been a consultant to the Builders Institute, and as well as a personal friend. And he and that parish are planners. I mean, you know, you've got to know planning, and they know planning. And you'll see this little announcement and impact, but he was recently appointed to be chair of the Westchester County Planning Board, very wise choice, by George Latimer. Also, I have, not quite as big a role, but George has also reappointed me as the Central Westchester representative to the Westchester County Housing Opportunities Commission, for which I formally thank him now, but I thanked him before on that. So, without further ado, our new county executive, I think it's so fair to say that, our new county executive, George Latimer.
Albert and I are two kids from Mount Vernon. We did okay, Albert. Here we are. It's pretty amazing sometimes. But it's great to be with you. I see friends in the audience, and if I was a little late, I apologize. For all of my great advanced planning, at the last event I was at, somebody blocked my car. And if you've ever been in that situation, you basically have to go into a room of maybe double the number of these people and figure out who owned the Mercedes that's blocking your car. If you've ever had to do that, and in my case, I'm the county executive, so I'm going up to strangers. They go, "Oh, it's very nice to meet you." "It's very nice to meet you too. Do you have a Mercedes that's blocking?" In any event, if I have kept you waiting, I apologize. But it's a great opportunity to visit with you. I've done this before in my capacity as a legislator, both in the county and in the state. This is a new job for me. I'm 4.5 months on the job, so I'm on probation. I get it. I have to prove myself. And there's a lot of issues we have to deal with. What I hope we're going to do is deal with it in an open fashion and an inclusive fashion. For those folks who know me or don't know me, obviously we went through a rough campaign last year. My predecessor was the person I ran against, and I have respect for him. We disagreed on issues. Campaigns, unfortunately, now get pretty rough. I only had one child, so I never had this experience. But if you're a parent with 2 children, you come into the kitchen and you see the cookie jar broken, and each kid says the other one did it. That's what happens in politics too. He started, no, he started it, Whatever it is, perhaps unexpectedly, and it takes a little humility to say this, perhaps unexpectedly, I'm here as your new county executive, but willing to work with you, willing to figure out how do we work through things which are difficult, controversial issues, a challenge for economic development, how that affects the people that you represent in your economic interests. Because I do understand one fundamental thing. The success of real estate in this county is absolutely critical to the success of the county at large. And my dad, Stan Latimer, was a maintenance man. He was head of maintenance at Beach Point Club. By the sweat of his brow did I get to go to college. My mom worked in a factory, so we were a blue-collar kid from the south side of Mount Vernon. And I asked my dad once, after World War II, he moved from Brooklyn up to Westchester. He got a job up here. That's how I met my mom, who was from Westchester. And I said, "Pop, why'd you pick Westchester?" And he said in his inimitable ways, a man of as many words as was absolutely necessary to make a point, completely unlike me. He said, 2 reasons. Number 1, it's near New York City. Number 2, it's not New York City. It's pretty good, Pop. There's our economic development plan for Westchester County. We're near New York City, and we're not New York City. And if you think about it in a simplistic form, that is what our appeal is. We're next to a world-class city, and there's every reason to have business and economic, academic, media, publishing, fashion in this wonderful city that's next to us. But we offer an alternative, primarily a residential alternative, and then secondarily a commercial alternative to what's in New York City. That's our selling point. It's the same selling point that New Jersey makes, it's the same selling point that Fairfield County makes, but Fairfield County is a little further. New Jersey, you have to figure out how to get over the Hudson River. And Long Island, you got to get over the East River. And there's a few barriers, but Westchester has the advantages of having proximity to New York City and a wonderful quality of life. So as we proceed to try to figure out how to take advantage of our assets, our physical assets, the beautiful river, the beautiful Long Island Sound, the reservoirs in northern Westchester, we have to remember that we can't take away what one of our selling advantages is, which is the quality of our life. And the quality of our life comes from a host of things. You can certainly make the argument you've got great mobility into the city. 3 Metro-North lines. I know I've commuted every day, so it's not all as great as I may be saying it is. There are days when you stand on a platform in the wintertime and it's no big picnic to go into the city. But it is proximate, and you can commute in and out of the city. You've got a roadway system that can connect you to the city and then elsewhere, so it has those advantages. We have one of the highest educated populations that exist, and that is very important if you're going to bring a company, be it a small company or a major company, into Westchester County. You will find in our workforce people who can handle the kinds of workforce that a company like Regeneron needs. You know, when you create, when Len Schleifer and the folks of that level of scientific knowledge are looking for people to work, they're not looking for people to work in a plant with their hands, as my mom and dad did work. They're looking for people with a certain amount of educational background, and academic ability to walk in and handle that, and you can find that in the Westchester workforce. But we can't let the divisions that we have in ideology destroy what we are. And that is because in our politics today, you know it and I know it, I'm a member of a political party, a Democrat and all that, but we've let the divisions that we have ideologically fight so much that we discourage the kind of cooperation that we need to have. I've tried in my political career to the best of my ability, notwithstanding you get into political battles and they're not easy or pleasant, but to try to make it not about Republicans versus Democrats or liberal versus conservative, but let us reason together and let us figure out how to solve problems as bipartisanly as we can. And so far, this young administration of ours, we've reached out across the aisle. We've reached out to the Board of Legislators in ways that have not happened before. I served in the Board of Legislators. I chaired the Board of Legislators. I understand what it's like for a legislator to function. You work in a world with very narrow pressures on you, and you don't have the visibility that an executive has. You can't command attention the way an executive can, and you can develop resentments. And we have to anticipate that, so let legislators know that we can work together, and particularly work together across ideology and across party lines to do good individual things. Let me give you a couple of examples of this. You can applaud for that, because I believe that. If you believe in that, let me tell you, it's a hard sell right now. That philosophy is a hard sell. You have on one side of the equation a very convinced majority that wants to drive into their direction, and that always engenders an irrational opposition on the other side. And if you go home tonight and watch either Fox or MSNBC, that's all you're going to get. But that is not going to advance the interest of the country. But I'm not a national politician. I'm a Westchester guy. I'm George, the same George that grew up on the South Side that we knew from each other all those years ago. So how do we work through that? And I'll give you what we did this week as an example. We've had discussions about a series of deals, and they've been framed as public-private partnerships, and in a sense they are, but in a sense they're not, on a number of different issues. We have analyzed those issues, and we're trying to figure out exactly what is the public benefit as well as what's in it for the private entity. I spent 20 years in corporate life. I worked for subsidiaries of Nestle and ITT. I know what it's like to be inside a corporate structure. That structure is about making money. It's not about social benefit or anything else. As a side portion, you know, you try to be good to your constituents, your clients, but it's about making money. And if I'm negotiating with you, I'm trying to win financially for me. And if you can win too, then we have a deal. But it is also true that in looking at some of the arrangements, we looked at a number of them. In one case, we have a contract with Liberty Lines to run the Beeline bus system. That is a public-private partnership that's 30-some-odd years in its presence. And we held up an extension of the contract that would have been a 5-year extension, would have overshot my whole term of office. And we said, we want the right to look at the contract and analyze it. So that's what we've been doing. You haven't seen it in the newspaper. We're very close to signing a new deal, some slight adjustments, some adjustments that we think are going to benefit the taxpayers because we're going to be able to show some means of handling insurance a little bit differently, a little creatively, and positively. So that is an example of an arrangement made under my predecessor, which we're going to maintain. If you look at the, I don't spend any time looking at this, but if you looked at the various commissioners that I inherited, I kept most of them. I didn't fire them. One party didn't come in and say, out all you guys go and in all you guys come in. We made some changes, but we've kept a lot of good people because they're good. Because they were capable individuals, and they weren't ideological in labs and research and parks and recreation. On the other hand, we did an analysis of the Playland deal. And the analysis that was done by our county attorney, John Nona, and our operations director, Joe McDonald, identified that the deal as it stood before us, we felt was not a good deal. By the way, this is not a negative to Standard Amusements or to Nick Singer or his people. They negotiated what they thought was good for them. We're looking at it now and saying we need to go back to the table and have a discussion. We have a signed contract, so we understand what happens. You don't break contracts, lightly, because it gets litigated and that gets ugly and it gets expensive. But we want to revisit it because we think that there is a different and a better way to do this thing. And I think that's only rational. So you have Liberty Lines on one hand, a reevaluation of something that we're going to go forward with, Playland, a different kind of evaluation for which we want to go back to the table to renegotiate. We didn't announce we were blowing the deal up. We announced that we have some real problems with it, and we need to sit down and discuss it. And that, I think, is the rational way to approach governance. That was Monday. On Tuesday, we were able to strike a compromise that allows us to build 74 units of affordable senior housing on the site of the old West Health project, which was just outside the footprint of Westchester Community College. You may remember that was done all those years ago by a young fellow named Andrew Cuomo was involved in it. You may remember that Richard Hyman was director there. It was targeted for homeless individuals, and it was part of a couple of projects, one in Mount Vernon, as I recall, and there may have been a third one. And that was a 20-year deal, which expired, I believe, in 2011. I might be off by a year or two. And when it expired in 2011, the building has sat fallow for the last 7 years, as there was a battle and a debate between the neighborhood and the town and the county, and we're going to do this, but we're not going to do this, and you don't do that. We sat down with the developer, came up with a plan. We didn't come up with a plan. He came up with a plan that he felt was financially feasible for 74 units of affordable senior housing. We had some opposition from the town board. We sat, we broke reasonably, we had reasonable conversation, we didn't make any ultimatums. They dealt with the neighborhood, we had some dialogue, we came to agreement. We were able to announce that we will have 74 units in this building, which is lay fallow, will go back into service, 74 units of affordable senior housing. Now you might say that politicians only care about themselves, that's the only reason why they do it. I signed up for Medicare in November. I hit 65, so yes, anything that's good for seniors, I'm interested in. And I don't expect to be there, but the bottom line is the need for housing is universal across all demographics, ages, families, seniors, people that have 80% of income, people with 30% of income, it's all across the board. So we were able to strike a compromise deal. That's Tuesday. On Wednesday, we had a conference at the Westchester County Center in which we attracted representatives of most of the 45 municipalities, the towns, villages, and cities of Westchester, and the senior management, all the commissioners and so forth of Westchester County government to begin the process of doing a new plan for shared services. Figuring out how to share services between these corporate entities that we all are is not easy, and each has their own interest. If you know Broxville and you know Tuckahoe, they're two communities that are side by side, but they're very different communities. They each have a different envisionment of what's important to them. And so you can't sit in White Plains or Albany and just say, Tuckahoe, Bronxville, you'll do this. You have to try to figure out how to make an incentive that will get the cooperation you need to get the advancement you need and not do it at gunpoint, not under threat of a lawsuit, but by trying to show a way. This is what we have to work out. We have worked it out. You have to figure out how do we save people money? Where can we share those services? It might be in a highly public service. It might be in a back of the house service. It might be the county doing something regionally that takes up the cost of it, and you save the money at the local level. It might be devolving something down to the local level, which they could do better than we can do, and that's how you save money. But whatever it is, that's what we started in this massive conference on Wednesday to try to figure out. So in these last 3 days prior to today, we're trying to be as pragmatic as we can and deal with issues as they really are, and also do it with openness and transparency. So, The elephant in the room in your industry is this proposed co-op law, which is in the county legislature right now, which the county legislature is discussing. And this is a time for you, the people that you represent, those of you who represent co-op boards, to be inclusive and included in the dialogue. And you need to do it now. You need to have not just those of you who are managing situations for these entities, but for the actual people who represent the board members of the various co-ops to engage with their county legislators and help them understand the economics and the practicalities of what it's like in a co-op setting, so that you can find a way to shape, influence, whatever this product might be. Now that I'm not a legislator, in the past, and Glenn Riddell with the Riddell Group has been a great lobbyist for you all in Albany. He'd come in and see me all the time, vested rights, changes to the CEQA program so that I was more understanding to the business community. These kind of issues, he came to me as a legislator, George, would you sign on to this? Would you advocate for these things? And he made a strong case. Now, I'm not a legislator, I'm not an advocate. I'm the guy that signs the bill or vetoes the bill at the end of the day. And I'd rather have a bill that I can sign that I know has universal support to the greatest extent possible. And there's a certain amount of collision between the interests of the realtors and the interests of the co-op managers and owners. You're allies on so many other things. On this one, maybe you're at loggerheads. But this is the time for you to be engaged and involved and have the people that work with you to try to help shape this. And there is no automatic time clock that says this thing has to be passed in June or it has to be passed in May or July. It's passed when enough people feel that it's ready to go in the form that it should be. So I'm not trying to give you a homework assignment, but I think this is the opportunity you have to do in White Plains what it takes you to hire a professional to do in Albany, which is reach out and lobby on something that matters to you. But to do it in a way where you're dialoguing and you're giving legislators an insight into the things that you know. And out of this process, without presuming what the conversation is going to be like, I'm hopeful that something positive will come out of it. And it'll come from your input, and the realtors will make their point, and the Board of Legislators will hear it, and we'll figure out how best to deal with it. But that is my personal advice to you as a group. And from my standpoint, you're welcome to communicate with me. You're welcome to send emails, letters. Happy to hold a meeting with a delegation of anybody that wants to come up to White Plains or come over to the offices in White Plains to express what their thoughts are, what their concerns are. The door is open. This is the way you do it differently than in Washington. You do it differently when it's not just well, I've got to go talk to this elected official. When it's Ken Finger, whom I've known for a long, long time, calls me up. This has actually happened on a matter of real estate. Ken calls me up, comes, visits me, sits down, explains some things, we dialogue back and forth, we come up with a final result that was positive from Ken's client. This one of Bob Sorensen, who I've known for a long, long time, catches me, calls me up, hey George, let's go get a cup of coffee at the Portchester Diner. And we do that. And we have dialogue, and we see if we can advance the issue to where we go. And the aforementioned Richard Hyman was my boss 40 years ago in the city of Mount Vernon. He was Deputy Commissioner of Planning. Vince Ferrandino, a name you may recall, or may know of, was the Commissioner of Planning, and I was a 23-year-old guy involved in housing, dealing with the Section 8 program. So when Richard calls me up, walks in the door, he has credibility in my eyes, and that's why I decided, unbelievably, let's appoint a planner to head the planning board. Wasn't that a great insight? It seems so obvious, but that's what it is. I'm in this room, I have my longtime friend Peter Gator. We were also young men in Mount Vernon back in the day. I know the kind of architectural talent he brings to the table. And Jeff Hanley. Now that I'm no longer a Mount Vernon guy, I'm a Rye guy. Jeff's a Rye guy. I know where his folks live and all this stuff. And Jeff calls me up, and we talk. We try to find common ground. So I got the Mount Vernon guy and the Rye guy to influence me. This is why, Glenn, you're not needed down here. But I don't mean to make a light point of it. We have issues ahead of us. We have issues to deal with in the overall state county budget. They're not easy to deal with. We have gone 7 years without increasing the amount of money that we've spent, and nobody wants to pay more taxes, but if you don't buy a new suit in 7 years, what's your wardrobe going to look like? If you have a house, you don't invest any money in 7 years, what are you going to be dealing with? So there is some prudent level of investment that's necessary in capital projects, and those capital projects many times are necessary. The road that's in front of a building that you're managing that's in bad shape, Doesn't help you sell the units in the bill or rent the units in the building. So we've got to be practical, and we've got to look at this not ideologically, but pragmatically. And sometimes pragmatically means that you're going to come and visit and you're going to say, George, we like you, you're a nice guy. Ann Jordan says, George, you're wrong on this issue. And I say, why am I wrong, Ann? And you listen. And that hopefully is what you'll see in this administration going forward. So, very general comments, more of an attitudinal place of where we're at than it is a specific grocery list of things we have to do. We do, in fact, have to make some decisions on the future of the Westchester County Airport. We do, in fact, have to look at this playland deal and I think figure out how to get a better deal operating. We do have to look at shared services, and we do have to come up with a budget that invests in the infrastructure the way it should, but without raising taxes at any kind of a level that we will all find objectionable. And then we'll have new challenges that we follow. But right now is a great time to be in Westchester. The prices in Manhattan and Brooklyn are sending people our way. And they're thinking, gee, if I can get a place in Mamaroneck by the train station right across Columbus Park, if I can live down on the waterfront in Yonkers, you know, you look at that apartment, how much is that apartment to rent for a month? $2,700 for a one-bedroom apartment. That seems outrageous. What's the price of that same apartment in the city? When you jump on the train, you're 40 minutes, 30 minutes away from Midtown Manhattan. It's just like being in an outer borough of New York City. And may I add another thing? We're all worried about what the SALT deduction is going to mean. I'm an empty nester. And, you know, maybe it's time to sell the house and get an apartment that's a rental, or co-op, buy a train station. Because as we get older, we're going to want an elevator to go up and down. We're going to want to be on a train into the city so we can go down and enjoy our life once I get rid of this job. Or you get rid of me in this job, whatever comes first. And so there are things happening in the marketplace which give us opportunity. And we have to figure out together how to capitalize on the opportunity and do it realistically and not necessarily ideologically. So I appreciate your courtesy of time. I don't think I put most of you to sleep, but I will stop. If you think I should take questions, I'm happy to take them.
Absolutely.
So, but thank you very much for your courtesy tonight.
We'll take questions. Now, the only thing is one of our mics isn't working, so I think the room is small enough so that if you ask a question, get up, identify yourself, and articulate, project, and then George, just for the benefit of those on the other side who may not be able to hear, you can just repeat the question.
Okay, well, thank you.
All right, so questions, anybody? Anybody, questions? Mr. Nilsson, even though I mentioned your name, identify thyself.
Okay, Ken Nilsson. I'm a landlord in Yonkers, and the last county, you know, I got the county tax bill, which was substantially higher than it has been in the last few years. And we're just entering the period when we're going to be dealing with the Rent Guidelines Board. And my concern is that, you know, the ETPA should be basically a cost pass-along system, but my concern is that it's not going to be passed along based on the history of the Rent Guidelines Board. In terms of your recommendation of how we could all live together and work these things out, have any recommendations of how we can deal with that? How you as a county executive, can deal with that issue? Because it's not just you, but the rest of the board decided we needed to spend more money, but somebody's got to pay for it.
Right. Well, the specific bill that you're paying in Yonkers, I'm not obviously sure of how it all played out. You're dealing with a county piece of your taxes that's approximately 20-25% of your total tax bill. So if your total tax bill went up, I'd want to do the drill down on it. This past year, the board, before I took office, raised the tax levy by 2%. And for the prior 7 years, there was no raise in levy. Now, that amortizes out differently depending on which community you're in because of what happens to your tax base and your equalization rate. So if you're paying more this year, I would look at your last 8-year span to determine if this recent spike is part of a trend or an individual thing that's happened. But regardless of that, on the Rent Guidelines Board issue, I had a bill when I was in the state legislature to give county executives the power to appoint the members of the Rent Guidelines Board. And I said, if it's good enough for the mayor of New York City, it ought to be good enough for the suburban counties that have ETPA, Nassau, Westchester, Suffolk, Rockland. That didn't happen. So as it stands now, we have the same situations we've had in the past, which is the Board of Legislators makes recommendations, and then HCR, I guess, exerts oversight, might reject a candidate, particularly the public candidates, the guys in the middle. We know there's going to be a couple of tenants, going to be a couple of landlords, guys in the middle. Truthfully, I haven't looked at the composition of the Rent Guidelines Board at the moment, and so I'm going to put on my to-do list to do that, to see who's on the board these days. I dealt with it once upon a time when I was a legislator 20 years ago, see who's there now, what vacancies there are, and you know, speak with my colleagues in the legislature to talk about what they're looking for, because I do think, as you point out, you need a balance. You need to be able to look at the merit of what's happening out there, not automatically assume that that is a freeze or raise or a lowering. It has to be based on what's happening with fuel costs, what's happening with taxes and all the other costs that you have to pay. But my commitment in leaving the room is I'll go back and look at the composition of the board. Ken, are you still a landlord member of the board?
Yes.
And who's the other landlord member?
Elliot Sherson, attorney, lives in Tarrytown.
All right, so I'll make a second commitment. Why don't you and Elliot give me a call, come visit, and let's talk about what's happened in the past few years while I've been at the state, not really paying close attention. And let's dialogue about it, see what happens with it.
Thank you.
So you have those two commitments, A, to look at the composition of the board, B, to meet with the two landlord representatives and talk about, you know, what the history has been recently and what the rationale is going forward.
Thank you. We'll do.
Okay, thanks. Sorry to give you another thing to do, Ken. And unfortunately, not a billable hour when you come to meetings, so.
We'll be happy to do it.
Okay, thank you.
The PS to that, by the way, is that we used to have Robert Herman, who was the former state administrator for rent administration for DECR, going back to when the law was, you might even remember Robert.
Yeah, I do.
And it's one of the great inequities of state law that a tenant can serve as a tenant, it's right there in the statute, a tenant can serve as a tenant rep on the County Rent Guidelines Board, but a landlord cannot serve as an owner rep. One has to deal with surrogates who know the industry but who are not landlords, like Ken Finger and Elliot Sherson. So it's these things that are just so built into the system that cause the whole system to be biased, in addition to all the other examples that, for instances, that Ken Nelson gave. George.
Yeah, hi, George Canis, and I have not a problem, but thank you. I serve on the board of Friends of the Wakelands Youth Bureau with Frank.
Yes, Frank Williams, yeah.
Director. I just want to thank you so much for restoring funds for youth organizations. Such an important thing to be able to provide these kids structured activities, and just shapes their lives. Thank you.
What we're referring to is when we came into office, there's a program called Invest in Kids, and there's a certain amount of money set aside to fund programs that assist youth. They are often targeted for urban youth situations, and you know, being a kid from Mount Vernon, you know, you see the problems that young people have in those urban settings, and there's different organizations, and you fund them not as pork, but because they have legitimate programs that help keep some number of these kids pointed in a positive direction, because it's going to be a hell of a lot more expensive to incarcerate a kid that goes wrong than it is to help a kid go the right way and he becomes a productive member of society. The White Plains program, there's also programs in Peekskill, Yonkers, and New Rochelle that we restored with this funding. The money was cut. We looked at it in terms of what it meant to the county budget. 1.8 billion was a relatively small amount, and we felt the restoration made sense. And I happen to know Frank, and I know what the kind of job he does in White Plains. So it was really, thank you for the compliment. It was a pretty easy decision to restore the money, to be honest with you. But thank you for the compliment. We'll take it.
Jane Curtis.
The biggest difficulty that we have in talking with our county legislators about the co-op admissions bill is that so many of the most ardent proponents truly believe that any rejection of an applicant, if it's not for financial reasons, must necessarily be because of bias. And it does no good to say, well, this isn't true. So we've attempted to do some fact checking and to quantify it. And we've asked our members to take a look at their past, believe it or not, financial annual reports. Because if they are facing any contingent liability from a lawsuit because of bias, it will be noted there in the footnotes to the annual financial statements. And we found virtually nothing, going back over many years. So our feeling is that there's so many protections in place already, and particularly the Human Rights Commission. And you have rejuvenated that Human Rights Commission and strengthened it. And, to your point that we need to work together to find solutions that satisfy everyone, would it not be a sensible thing to do to allow this rejuvenated Human Rights Commission to operate for a couple of years and see what, if anything, they uncover before we pass this really devastating legislation for co-ops?
And I think that might be a very reasonable way to think. But I think you're right, though. I think sometimes this happens, it happens in other fields, but it certainly happens in government and politics. Perception becomes reality rather than a cool analysis of reason. But you have to fight the perception game too. So what you're talking about doing, I think, is helpful. And let me look on my calendar, because I'm going to give you, I think, 1 or 2 dates that I have on my calendar. I want to invite you to come to one of the next town hall coffee and conversation sessions we have. Now, my predecessor last year did town hall meetings. They were generally at night, and they were generally, sort of presenting PowerPoint, a few questions. We're doing it differently. Saturday mornings, 10 to 11:30, kind of wide open, casual attire. Myself and the county legislator together from the district. We sit at the table, we talk a little bit about what we're doing, and then it's open mic. And this would be an excellent opportunity, depending on where people are, to come and to express their opinion. It's not 3 minutes type of thing. Obviously we don't want guys to do a 45-minute speech, but, and if you just forgive me, I have my magnifying glasses on. I think my next one is in Yonkers, but it is this month. I think it's, oh, I may have picked this date. Looks like it's over the weekend. It's Yonkers Coffee and Conversation with County Legislator David Tubiolo on Saturday morning, May 26th, 10 a.m. I don't have the location in Yonkers. If you want to call my office, you can jot this down for anybody out there. You can put it out. I'm sorry?
It's Memorial Day weekend.
It is, yeah. I'm not going out of town, so. Stick around. Look, if you missed this one, it's not the last one. There's other ones coming. But enjoy yourself wherever you're going to be, because I'm going to be in Yonkers with David Tubiolo. You knew this is the kind of town. I was going to be joking around.
I have to say that Diana Verrill and I and Caesar Manfredi, who's president of his co-op in Irvington, we were at, I think, one of your first, about 3 months ago.
In Hastings.
In Hastings, with Mary Jane Shinsky. So these are, and I speak from experience, these are very, very lively, presentations and discussions that you have been having.
And this is a great chance, not, because it's around the county, different places. You don't have to, put on, for guys, suit and tie, or put on your corporate attire, go to the county board of legislators, which you're always entitled to do. But this is casual, stop by, stay for 20 minutes, stay for an hour and a half. But the next one, and you're welcome to come to it in Yonkers, you have to call me at 995-2910. That's the county executive office number, 995-2910. We'll tell you the location. You can call if you want to put it out in some other communication. But you can come that morning, and then I've got another one coming up after that in Mount Pleasant. And I know this is very boring to do it this way, do forgive me, but it's in June. Here it is. Is it? Nope. The next one is Saturday, June 9th at the Barnes & Noble in Vernon Hills Shopping Center. Scarsdale Post Office is actually Eastchester. Legislator David Marr is there, so if you got Garth Road presence, you're pretty close to Garth Road there. Saturday morning, June 9th in Eastchester. And then I have another one in Mount Pleasant, and that's the weekend after Saturday, June 16th. It's at Town Hall in Mount Pleasant, which I think is in Hawthorne or Thornwood, with Margaret Kunzio. That one's a little later. That's 11:30 to 1. So there's at least 3 of them upcoming. Come. And I think it's really important, have people who are on the co-op board come and have them say, hi, I'm George Latimer. I've lived in this co-op for 35 years. I'm the president of the co-op board, I'm a member of the co-op board, I'm a resident just like anybody else is. I bought shares in a corporation, and in that corporation we have a common investment. And it's very important to know that the other people who have made this investment are as committed to the investment as I am. And that's why we do the screening. We're not doing the screening to keep out those people. We're doing it to make sure that the people who buy into this investment are as committed to the investment as we are. I was once in a rental apartment very early in my life. And I want to be an tenant leader because I was the one guy who figured out how to deal with the Con Edison problem. And I had people coming to my door, knocking on my door all the time. Mrs. Renanti came, she says, well, somebody's parked in my parking space. And I'm the tenant leader, I don't know about the parking space. But that's what co-op board people go through. And to some extent, to see the human face of those individuals is helpful, so that it's seen not as some star chamber of powerful people who are going, like the Roman, Caesar, like this, but that they're trying to make an assessment. And, if you rejected Madonna from coming into your co-op, there's a reason. It ain't money, it's Madonna and what Madonna brings. And, maybe somebody wants that, but I suspect, there's a reason not to want it. And so I would say if you can come to any of those sessions, bring to speak whoever's appropriate, put the human face on it, I think that will help you make your point. I don't want to take up all night here, but I'll take some more questions if you want.
Your time is a
Okay.
consideration too. We'll take a couple more questions. Anybody? Anybody? So you're gonna let them off that easy, right? Okay. Well, listen, George, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.